Our view of the sea has always been that it is huge, beautiful, and inexhaustible. The oceans are the common heritage of all mankind, and for billions of years they have been full of life.
These huge resources, these that we once believed to be renewable, that our whole human history has led us up to now to believe that are renewable are not renewable anymore because of what we're doing to them.
What a crunch, it's truly fat.
We never used to think about where our fish came from, but in fact, they are wild animals. And we found that out to our cost for the first time in Newfoundland. For centuries, the waters in northern Canada teemed with unbelievable amounts of codfish. The cod was so plentiful, the communities thrived on fishing. As the years went on, technology improved. The boats got bigger and catches increased. The bounty seemed endless. Then, in 1992, the unthinkable happened.
In St. John's tonight, angry fishermen vented their rage. They charged the room where John Crosby was holding a news conference, but security would not let them in.
What had once been the most abundant cod population in the world had been fished out of existence. Overnight, 40,000 people lost their jobs.
The cod is gone, and I think within the context of cod, particularly in the Canadian perspective, is that this is a species that has been fished for centuries and centuries. Cod was the reason that people migrated from the UK, from Europe, northern France in particular, to Canada. It was because of cod.
The fishing ban brought the people to the streets. They hoped that one day the cod would return.
The significance didn't drop, didn't dawn on anybody till much later.
Today, there are so few left that they've got endangered status in Canada, and the cod populations have not rebounded despite a moratorium on cod fishing since 1992.
After the collapse of the cod, a new breed of fishery scientists started to investigate what had been happening to all the fish in every ocean of the world. Local catches of fish had been declining almost everywhere. But what puzzled the scientists in 2001 was that the total world catch kept going up and up. It didn't make sense.
The concerns that people had expressed that local stocks were going down everywhere, but that global statistics were showing an increase, that this was a discrepancy.
Daniel Pauly, a leading expert in global fishing, was asked by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to investigate this mystery.
Daniel Pauly had the brilliance to start examining why, in the face of the evidence that you saw in front of you locally, and in the face of evidence like Newfoundland, that the figures kept going up.
It was when Pauly and his colleagues looked at the reported catches from China that they found their answer.
For every part of the world, the reporting was right, except for Chinese waters.
When Daniel Pauly came to this department and he said, "I think they're wrong." I said, "What do you mean they're wrong?" He said, "Well, it can't be that China's catching that much."
We concluded that they were so biased upward, so much, that if you corrected for this effect, the world catch would not be increasing, but decreasing.
For the first time in human history, the future of the food the world gets from the sea was in doubt.
Sent a shiver down my spine, because that was the one thing that a lot of people were holding on to. Well, things may be bad, but at least we're catching lots and we're catching more every year, so it can't be that bad.
From about 1988, we now realize it was on the way down. This is a story that was going on at the same time as human influences elsewhere, but it's been told late. It's been told we haven't had so much time to do something about it. Now it's on us. And now, in the next maybe 40, 50 years, it's crisis, it's crash, it's do something about it time. And that's why this is arguably one of the biggest problems in the world.
For the last 3,000 years, these men and their forefathers have expected giant bluefin tuna to migrate from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. And every spring, the fishermen set their trap, an ancient method of fishing known as the almadraba. The almadraba fishermen once used to catch thousands of bluefin. But over the last 10 years, their catches have declined by 80%. On the other side of the world, in Canada, scientist Boris Worm had been trying to work out how many tuna and other large fish were left in the sea.
We asked that very simple question: where are we now relative to a baseline that we set around 1950, because large-scale industrialized fishing started around 1950. So here in 1952, when this series starts, we see that around Japan there's already blue colors dominating, meaning that the catch rates were low, around 1 fish per 100 hooks. In areas that were newly exploited, we see catch rates about 10 times higher, 10 or more fish per 100 hooks.
Worm used Japanese fishing fleet data that had recorded how many fish were caught on every 100 hooks they set.
This is the first time industrial longline fisheries went out into the open ocean and just worked through the whole ecosystem. And you see that the fishery has reached a truly global coverage. And a lot of the ocean is in the blue colors now, meaning that the abundance of these large fish globally has probably declined by about 90%. This has been widely criticized, and there have been many papers written to undermine and attack these findings.
Some fisheries scientists felt that Worm's findings didn't reflect their local situation. Some thought that even attempting to count how many large fish were left in all the oceans was an impossible task.
I think that in their haste to get the big picture, they don't look carefully enough at local places.
The overall trends in Worm's findings were reflected in official data. Species after species had collapsed.
Everybody recognizes that there's major problems in the world's fisheries, and at one level, it's a question of how bad is it.
Global fishing capacity could catch the world catch 4 times over. The world's longlining industry sets 1.4 billion hooks every year. These are estimated to be set on enough line to encircle the globe more than 550 times. The mouth of the largest trawling net in the world is big enough to accommodate 13 747s.
The thing is, we're too good right now. Technologically, not a single hunted animal on this earth has a chance.
The skipper knows exactly where he is in relationship to a rock where fish could hide, in relationship to a wreck where fish will be attracted to.
One of the largest scale transformation of the planetary environment has been the impact of bottom trawlers, nets that are dragged across the seabed, and as they are pulled, they cut down the animals that live on the surface, things like corals and sea fans and sponges. But the signs of destruction brought up on deck by the trawl would make an angel weep.
If the fishing effort continued to increase, continued to be directed at the dwindling resource, you would of course catch most of it.
The bluefin is one of the most iconic fish in the sea. Pound for pound, its delicious flesh is the most expensive and sought after on the planet. For many years, scientists have been predicting that the king of the tuna would be hunted to extinction. But now, it is actually happening. Roberto Mielgo is a bluefin tuna fisherman who has turned whistleblower on an industry he believes is out of control. A lone presence in the ports of Europe, Mielgo is hunting for information to bring the slaughter to a halt.
What's at stake here is an infamous minority of people making millions and millions and millions by decimating a species. Is that right? Is that moral?
In Luxembourg, European Union ministers meet to decide the fate of the fish and the industry which depends on it. Fishing is supposed to be controlled through internationally agreed quotas, the amount fishermen are allowed to catch. These are recommended by scientists. Scientists are recommending a catch of 15,000 tons simply to avoid collapse. In order to rebuild the fish population, the catch needs to be less, at 10,000 tons. But ministers vote for a catch of 29,500 tons, twice what it should be to keep the population from crashing, and 3 times what it should be to let the fish recover.
If fishery managers were engineers, they would have been fired long ago, because we'd be having collapsing buildings and bridges all over the place because the calculations are so far out. And so it's not a question of if fish stocks will collapse when you make decisions like that. It's a question simply of when. Collapse is inevitable.
Roberto Mielgo has come to Malta to investigate whether the tuna industry is catching more than the quota allows.
Hello, Charles. How are you doing?
How are you getting on?
Well, busy.
Have you found a lot?
Quite a lot, yes.
Despite the scientists recommending an annual catch of 15,000 tons and the politicians setting 30,000 tons, official figures show that the Mediterranean bluefin tuna industry simply ignores the regulations and catches 61,000 tons, a third of the entire bluefin tuna population.
This is a disgrace. Nobody is enforcing the rule of law. This is a disgrace for the European Union.
The fate of bluefin shows what international fisheries policy and consumer demand can do to a wild species. But the race to catch the last fish, whatever its price, is happening all over the world. Hundreds of millions of people in the world depend on fish to keep them alive. For 1.2 billion people, it is a key part of their diet. Fishing is one of the most wasteful practices on Earth. Every year, more than 7 million tons, a tenth of the world's catch, goes back over the side dead.
Man is not going to change, and the sea going to be dead. Because man is crazy. We are crazy. Our world is crazy world.
On the east coast of America, there is a terrifying clue of what can happen when you disturb the ocean's natural equilibrium. In Chesapeake Bay, there have been increasing reports of a plague of biblical proportions. A little-known inhabitant of the bay, the cow-nosed ray, has exploded in numbers. Local scientist Pete Peterson was investigating the increase in the cow-nosed ray population when he noticed that the graph of their growth was the exact opposite of the graph of the decline in their main predator, the shark.
Even a number of quality scientists will tell you that, that statistics are in some ways icing on the cake when you do your science. But to tell you the truth, as you look at a plot of how the numbers of sharks along this coast have changed, how the numbers of rays, skates, and smaller sharks have changed at the same time, you don't need a statistic at all. It jumps right off the page at you.
When large predators are taken out, when they're depleted in abundance as much as they are, we have large ecosystem effects that can cause all sorts of domino effects throughout the ecosystem.
There's evidence of this knock-on effect happening all over the world. In Newfoundland, lobster numbers are exploding.
The loss of cod and other bottom-dwelling fishes, what we have seen is an increase in the abundance of other things. So in this part of the Atlantic, there's always been a fair number of lobster, but there's now evidently quite a bit more. So it seems fairly reasonable to conclude that the decline of cod and other predatory fishes basically paved the way for an increase in the abundance of those things that cod used to eat.
This is the situation that happens everywhere we have removed the fish, the large fish. In many places, what has exploded is the shrimp. Shrimp have exploded. It's good shrimp, good money, but if you fish them, what then?
The end point is when the prawns and the scallops too have gone. We really will be down to a highly simplified ecosystem of mud and worms.
Jellyfish infestations are increasing. Beaches are becoming no-go zones. Our oceans, once full of large fish, are now filling up with algae, plankton, and worms.
We're losing species. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for society? What does it mean for the predictability of the global oceans, which is 70% of the planet? And the answer is, with every species that disappears, some of those services are eroding. There's less food, there's declining water quality, and there's declining stability of the system.
According to data collected by the United Nations, the number of fish species whose populations have crashed is growing year by year. Worm and the other scientists have projected that if the current trends continue, the stocks of fish which we now eat will have collapsed by the middle of the century.
It's not rocket science, because if we're depleting one species after another, it's a finite resource. There will be a point in the future where we will run out if we don't change the way we treat this global resource.
Whoever makes an extrapolation makes it always assuming that things remain the same. And I would say that assuming that things remain the same, this prediction that we will have no fish in 50 years or so are essentially correct.
When the human population comes under real pressure on land, when we begin to have real problems from global warming, when we start running out of enough food to feed ourselves, we have just squandered one of the greatest resources that we've ever had on the planet, wild fish. That's what it means.
People ask me all the time, are you despairing or are you hopeful? And I say, I'm absolutely hopeful. We have a much better understanding than even 5 years ago of what's going on. Like with pollution, like with ozone depletion, with climate change more recently, things started to happen and people made changes.
Alaska is on the front line in the battle to conserve fish. Alaska has a 200-mile fishing limit, which it strictly enforces.
Portlock Bank, Coordinates are going to be 56. It appears that they've been fishing in one area and they're claiming another.
Alaska's fishing policy is not perfect, but the number of fishing boats here is carefully controlled, and managers can monitor how much is being caught and react accordingly.
One of the differences between Alaska and, let's say, the North Sea is that the average exploitation rate on stocks in Alaska is on the order of 10% a year. In the North Sea, it's 50%.
If you look at it from just a personal perspective, sometimes there's a personal sacrifice. But you take that knowing that it gives you an opportunity to maybe have a better season 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. We just don't want to catch that fish this year or next year. We want to catch it 10, 15, 20 years from now.
As consumers, we have the power to bring about a positive change at sea by demanding to know where our fish comes from, how it was caught, and whether it is endangered.
Lots of the time people say, where are all the fish, 90% of the fish gone? Where are they? Well, we have eaten them. That's what we have. We have eaten them.
When we look at a piece of fish on our plate, what do we know about that fish? Do we know what species it is even? Do we know whether it was caught legally or illegally, or in the waters of some distant country where the inhabitants would actually prefer to have caught it themselves?
For consumers, there are guides to identifying which fish is better to eat. Then there are labels which certify its sustainability. One is issued by the Marine Stewardship Council, the MSC.
What we do and the choices we make in, say, supermarkets, when we go to a restaurant, actually has a direct effect on marine diversity.
Marine reserves are areas of the world's oceans where commercial fishing is completely banned. The results can be staggering.
Wherever people have established an area that's off limits to fishing and policed it well, they've been resolute in their pursuit of protection, reserves have shown marvelous benefits. I studied marine reserves in the Caribbean, and we saw an increase of 3, 4, 5 times the amount of fish that were present initially over a period of 7 years of protection after that.
We have about 4,000 marine reserves of different sizes in the world. They cover less than 1% of the world ocean. 99.4% of the ocean is fishable.
Marine reserves on their own will not solve the problem of the emptying seas. Fishermen and migratory fish will move to unprotected areas, so these also have to be controlled. Politicians have to act responsibly when making decisions about the oceans. Consumers need to change their eating habits. And the global fishing industry has to abide by the rules and reduce its capacity.
Anyone who's 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, this has happened on our watch, and we have a collective responsibility.
We can act now. It's not rocket science. We don't need more knowledge to do so. You can do it here. You can do it now.